Leonard Bernstein was one of the most influential musicians of the 20th century. Born in 1918, he spent much of his early life in Boston, but later became a prominent figure in New York, where he conducted the prestigious New York Philharmonic Orchestra. By the time of his death in 1990, Bernstein had achieved fame the world over. He conducted major orchestras on both sides of the Atlantic, and many of his compositions had achieved critical acclaim. Among his most famous compositions are West Side Story, Candide, On the Town, Wonderful Town, Mass, and his three symphonies, Jeremiah, Age of Anxiety, and Kaddish. Bernstein was also a renowned educator, bringing music to a new generation through his popular young people's concerts and Thursday evening previews. But before the fame, Bernstein composed and published his first work, a 10-minute, two-movement sonata for clarinet and piano. This sonata will be the focus of this video, Leonard Bernstein's Clarinet Sonata, a documentary. In 1941, the year Bernstein began composing his Clarinet Sonata, Bernstein was finishing his conducting studies at Curtis. Throughout the year, he had been seeing the young pianist Shirley Gabus. Gabus and Bernstein would go out to see shows and spent a fair deal of time at Gabus's home together, where the two would play piano duets for four hands. That summer, Bernstein returned to Tanglewood to study with Kusavitsky, and there he shared quarters with New York clarinetist David Glaser. Taking a break from Tanglewood, Bernstein spent time at Key West, where he began composing his Clarinet Sonata. At summer's end, Bernstein moved back to his family's home in Sharon. He had no job prospects, and with mounting tension in Europe, he was keenly aware that he might be drafted to the armed forces. Bernstein finished the Clarinet Sonata by the spring of 1942. It was then first premiered by Bernstein and Glaser at the Boston Institute of Modern Art on April 21, 1942. This brief overview of an intense year for Bernstein provides many clues to understanding his sonata. At first, the sonata for clarinet and piano received mixed reviews. The Boston Globe praised its jazzy, rocking rhythms and its highly flavored harmonic style, while still criticizing its form, saying it abounds in ideas without sure direction, and the piano part is more interesting than the clarinet part. The Boston Herald also gave the premiere a mixed review. Its critic Rudolph Ely wrote the piece was an athletic sort of composition in the flavor of David Diamond. While it can be a positive reference for a young composer to be compared to a prominent musical figure, the term athletic contains negative undertones. Though Ely was most reminded of David Diamond while listening to the piece, several musicians and scholars have found the work to be most influenced by the styles of Hindemith, Copland, Stravinsky, and jazz. The first full analysis of the piece was done in 1947 by Joseph Carlucci, who contrasted the work with clarinet sonatas by three other composers. Charles Francis Del Rosso, in his 1969 dissertation, compared the work to other contemporary clarinet works of the time. Both Carlucci and Del Rosso concluded that Stravinsky, Copland, and Hindemith were sources of style for Bernstein, whereas later scholars and critics began to attribute jazz as a musical influence. For example, Lars Helgert, in his 2008 dissertation, shows boogie-woogie influence in the piano part. In addition, Bernstein included Latino influences, such as the second movement, where he explicitly references the Mexican dance called huapango. These various critiques and essays show a young Bernstein using many sources for inspiration and material. Though this was his first published work, we can already begin to see Bernstein becoming known for his eclectic borrowing of styles. According to scholar Anthony Bouchard, Bernstein's eclecticism may have been encouraged by his experience with the method. The method is an approach used by actors in which the actors search out hidden truths of their roles by performing in character, or rather, by attempting to understand the inner turmoil of their character. The method was developed by Konstantin Stanislavski, an acting instructor at the Moscow Art Theater. Tired of unengaging drama, Stanislavski not only trained his students' bodies through movement exercise, but their mental processes as well. When casting, he would seek actors who had similar experiences and inner turmoil as the characters they would play. He would train them to harness these experiences and emotions on stage, coach them to think how their characters would think, and react how their characters would react. Through psychoanalysis, he would tap the psyche of his actors, and in turn, they would tap the psyche of their characters. The method brought a much greater level of realism to the stage. As the method relies largely on tapping one's experience, actors were encouraged to collect new experiences and worldly knowledge. Any mental process that could be tapped on stage became an asset. This encouraged a sort of eclecticism, where artists would collect and store as much life experience as possible. Sounds like a great way to live. Bernstein was first introduced to the method through composer Aaron Copland in the late 1930s. Shortly after their first meeting, Copland introduced Bernstein to a group called Group Theater, led by Harold Clurman. The group also included Lee Strasberg, as well as Bernstein's future collaborator, Elia Kazan. Strasberg was the trainer of the method. After seeing the method in action in a performance directed by Stanislavski, he studied with two of Stanislavski's students, Richard Boleslavsky and Maria Uspensky, at the American Laboratory Theater. The method, as it applies to acting, is typically used to add a greater sense of realism and is considered especially useful in improvisation. This does not render it invalid to non-improv musicians, as they can still apply the method's emphasis on tapping one's experiences and putting those forces into what they create, creating perhaps a more sincere music. Bouchard claims Bernstein's experience with the group encouraged his eclecticism. Their technique encouraged him to broaden his mental collection of tunes, pieces, and life experiences to feed his imagination and to breed that imagination into his work. Through eclecticism and the method, Bernstein could feed his compositional work with his knowledge of scores as a conductor, and vice versa. Bouchard claims Bernstein continued to be influenced by the group's policies and ideas indirectly, not only through Copland, but also through his mentor Mark Blitzstein and his collaborator Jerome Robbins. Now let's examine how Bernstein may have applied the method and its emphasis on eclecticism to compose his Clarinet Sonata. For time purposes, this documentary will focus on establishing links with Hindemith, jazz, and the Latin style, and then see if we can link these choices of influences to events in Bernstein's life. In other words, we will explore the stylistic borrowings and hypothesize their connections to Bernstein. Why would Bernstein choose to model Hindemith? What connection did he have with Hindemith's music? With Latin music? Among the piano duets Bernstein played with Shirley Davis in 1941 was the Hindemith Sonata for four hands. Bernstein's excellent memory and sharp mind allowed him to borrow passages of Hindemith Sonata for his own, particularly in the first movement. The first example of Bernstein's musical borrowing occurs between the opening phrases of both movements. Bernstein opens with a solo clarinet gesture beginning on concert E, followed by a leap up to G, and then a descending motive to the first downbeat on A. Let's listen to the melodic line. In the opening melodic gesture of Hindemith Sonata, found in the primo part, an examination of the strong beats of the first three measures outlines the same key pitches as the Bernsteins. Let's now listen to this melodic motive. A keen eye will notice that the entrance of the primo part is not on a strong beat, but on beat 2. Hindemith, however, adds extra emphasis to E, as the secondo part begins the piece by sustaining E in 3 octaves. The general contour of the Bernstein gesture and the Hindemith are the same, both beginning with a leap up to the cell's appoggiatura and a descending motive carrying on to the A. If you're not yet convinced of the Hindemith connection, an even clearer example of Bernstein's borrowing can be found in the clarinet line at measure 79. In the Bernstein, the motive begins on E flat, and the first 3 pitches rise by a whole tone each. This is followed by an ascending leap of a minor third, descent of a perfect fourth, then a whole tone, half tone, and from there the sequence continues. Let's listen to the melodic line here. This is similar to a motive near the ending of the third movement of the Hindemith. Here, moving 32nd notes descend a half step from G through F, leap a perfect fourth to B flat, descending a perfect fifth, and then the pattern repeats. The motive repeats 3 times in both pieces, or every half note beat in Bernstein and every 8th note beat in Hindemith. Bernstein's is a borrowing of Hindemith's, where he has augmented and inverted the beginning intervals, but maintained the same descending 5th core of the sequence. In both pieces, the motive rises by a whole step for the second statement. In addition, both heighten the excitement by moving a half step away for the third statement. However, Hindemith moves up, creating a new appoggiatura, and Bernstein moves down, filling the gap between the two previous statements. The minor-second relationships created against the pitches in our memory in the Bernstein create a jazz-like tension, similar to what he would discuss later in his The World of Jazz. Bernstein continued borrowing from other styles in the second movement of the sonata, but this time he borrows from the Latin-type music he heard in Key West instead of from a composer. The form of this movement has been debated by various scholars. Del Rosso first labeled it as a rondo form, while more recently Diane Rentschler has called it a sonato allegro form. Regardless of which analysis you prefer, the movement can be divided into 5 different tempo sections. A slow beginning. B, a fast dance-like section in 5/8. A prime, a restatement of A. C, a mid-tempo answer to A that leads us to a final section of B prime. In particular, it is the B and B prime sections that contain the most obvious Latin influence. The rhythms evoke a sense of dance, like the Mexican huapango, a folk dance performed by couples on a raised wooden stage. The dance has complicated steps to match alternating duple and triple rhythm. Bernstein would have heard it while listening to bands on Radio Havana. Burton briefly states that Bernstein later used parts of the B prime melody as the basis for the melody in West Side Story's America, but he doesn't provide any elaboration. Pursuing this clue, the most closely related material between America and the sonata that I have found is in measures 225 to 238 of the Clarinet Sonata. Here, the oscillating C sharp and A up to D sharp, down through B to F sharp motive, serves as the basis for the chorus, I Want to Be in America. On first listening, this movement overpowers the audience with a concluding sense of festival. The dance is lively, though frequently performed slightly slower than the composer's tempo marking of 69. However, if one considers that Bernstein eventually used this melody in America, we can listen backwards for a more in-depth understanding. America is sung by the Puerto Ricans in West Side Story, contrasting life in Puerto Rico and the U.S. The song comes across very patriotic towards America, and the mixed rhythm used throughout embodies the conflict between the two views very well. Bernstein may have observed similar sentiments among some of the locals during his time at Key West. He would also have heard various patriotic sentiments, both to the U.S. and Cuba, on the radio. The sonata also uses a variety of meters, and though they are not mixed at regular intervals, the internal division of 5/8 into groups of 2+3 and 3+2 make it feel as though it's in a mixed meter. Knowing that this tune, despite its Latin influence, is used to represent the gaiety of life in America, as well as having deep patriotic undertones and references to conflict, can lead us to reflect on the inner conflicts Bernstein was himself experiencing in 1941.
I like to be in America, okay by me in America, everything free in America.
For a smoke me in America.
Let's not forget that this lively dance accounts for only half of the movement, and a smaller fraction of the entire piece. The beginning of the movement is marked andantino, a slow walking pace, and evokes a sense of pensive meandering. Bernstein was at the time as aimless as he'd ever been and was staring down the possibility of the military draft. In a letter from a compilation by Nigel Simmons, dated August 24, 1941, Samuel Barber writes to Bernstein that he hopes Bernstein is not called to war. In a letter to Koussevitzky the following month, Bernstein expressed that he felt a sense of responsibility to defend his nation. These contrasting accounts show a conflicted Bernstein, fretting about being drafted and perhaps feeling guilty for such worries. As a performer, the method argues that an actor should tap the psyche of their role character and imagine their inner turmoil to bring life to the stage. Substituting musician for actor, it is the performer's responsibility to bring meaning to a work. Combining the method, as Bernstein would have, with this new knowledge, musicians can now approach the Bernstein Sonata in a new light. Audiences and performers alike can now begin to see possible programmatic elements in the Clarinet Sonata. For the first movement, they can perhaps imagine young lovers at play, as Bernstein would have been with Gabus. The dialogue between the clarinet and piano might reference the dialogue of the primo and secundo parts in Hindemith, or the dialogue between the two youth, but regardless of which, the two characters are sure to be having fun. In contrast, the second movement is clearly embedded with inner conflict. Here, the audience can contemplate mixed feelings, including patriotism, aimlessness, restlessness, anxiety, love, and excitement. One should simply contemplate the anxiety of not knowing whether or not they are going to war, and the thoughts and concerns that would follow. Still, a listener should also be aware that Bernstein was a cheerful fellow who knew how to have fun. Bernstein may have thought, "Will all my work have been in vain? When will I return? What if I die?" Or perhaps something as trivial as, "Should I learn the Hoapongo?" Both these dense and playful questions may have been matters on Bernstein's mind. Finally, one should consider one last element of Bernstein's Clarinet Sonata, the dedication. Though David Glaser was both a friend and the clarinetist who premiered the work, Bernstein instead dedicated the work to clarinetist David Oppenheim. Bernstein met Oppenheim at Tanglewood in 1942, after he had already finished writing the piece. Oppenheim and Bernstein became close very quickly, and letters between the two contain many hints of an amorous relationship. Like Bernstein, Oppenheim too would face the draft, only he would not have had the same good fortune as Bernstein had in being dismissed as medically unfit. Oppenheim instead served as a gunner in World War II. Letters between the two leading up to Oppenheim's deployment reveal a mixture of anxiety toward the future and the loving companionship of the present. Considering their relationship, we can understand why Bernstein would have felt compelled to dedicate his work to Oppenheim. Indeed, the work would become the foundation to their continuing collaboration. Oppenheim wrote Bernstein, "Of course I'll come to New York City. Did you really think I'd let an outsider play it?" The playful relationship between the two was not unlike that between Bernstein and Gabus. In addition, Bernstein would have well understood Oppenheim's uneasiness about his future, having only a year earlier been summoned to the same cause. The dedication can be interpreted to ascribe extra meaning post-composition, and the many similarities between Oppenheim and Bernstein help to solidify the argument for the programmatic elements we've explored. It is now possible to add layers to the performer's use of the method. A performer can consider the piece through Bernstein's eyes. They can also consider it now as a gift to Bernstein's friend David Oppenheim, perhaps the dearest gift that Oppenheim had received, and certainly the dearest gift that Bernstein had to give. The performer can now also attempt to tap Oppenheim's psyche, as he is now connected to the piece. Now, having studied the method through discussion of Bernstein, association with group theater, the composition of the works it relates to, including Hindemith, Latin music, jazz music, and eventually West Side Story, among others mentioned from the other scholars, the situation of the composer during its composition, and the composer's intention through its dedication to David Oppenheim, we are now ready to listen to Bernstein's sonata for clarinet and piano with fully primed ears. What difference do these borrowings make, these programmatic connections, is entirely subjective, relying solely on imagination. Despite his love for jazz, Bernstein left little room for improv in his clarinet sonata. Dynamics, tempi, and articulation are all very clearly labeled. What remains? Perhaps intent, color, a narrative? I leave that for the audience to decide.